Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is attempt number 2 at words number 37, and we seem to have all of our internet issues resolved, at least for the moment, until incoming asteroids and solar flares bring something different. But anyway, we're here, and we're going to talk about YouTube's new election, or as Robert Phoenix would say, erection rules. And Dani, welcome back.
Welcome back. I missed you. You look great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, okay. So I want everybody to go and watch. Today is Thursday. The date is the 10th. I want people to go watch Robert's show from this morning, certainly the beginning part of it, because the way he has figured out to deal with talking about talking about the election, since YouTube has new rules about it, is he just refers to it as an erection, right? Listening to all of it, he was talking about like erection integrity and all that kind of stuff, but he did it totally straight-faced. He didn't crack it. It was so funny. Like I had that deep belly guttural laugh at like 7 o'clock in the morning, right? And he talked about like, he got into the Biden thing and he's like, the Democrats picked the wrong Biden, right? Because if they had picked Hunter, there'd be no question about erection integrity. Right? Everybody has to go watch. It is so funny. Robert, sometimes I'm like, Robert missed his calling and he should have been a stand-up comedian, right? He didn't miss his calling.
There's still time. There's still plenty of time.
He's great at this. I'm not saying that this is not his calling, but he could also be a comedian. There's lots of things he could do. He's very talented. But his erection integrity analysis from this morning was priceless.
I'm excited to watch it. Before I hopped on, I was watching the new Millie Weaver. I'm so glad we're talking about the YouTube thing today. Right. Why does she still have a channel? I don't get that.
It's a good question.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. So, okay. So YouTube's new rules, right? So like, okay. So they came out, like Sally tweeted them to us, right? And whatnot. And
be clear, they didn't email them to their users.
Right.
People had to go find them. It wasn't like there was no transparency and, hey, these are our new rules.
Right. So
only a week after their other new shitty rules, or right. 2 weeks.
So what was interesting is, and we started talking about this when we tried to record earlier in the week, but we had difficulties. Like we were going to explain our own experiences of YouTube's new rules. And for me, what was interesting is you told me about them. And when I went and looked, I get lots of emails from YouTube and whatever. I never received an email telling me about the new rules like some other people had. So my attitude was, maybe they just don't apply to me. Cool, moving on. Right? Like that was just kind of how I chose to do it.
But that's the thing with the new user agreements, which is not what we're talking about today. But before that, the ones which went out was like any videos you load as of November 18th, you are by default agreeing to our user agreement.
Okay, but I just thought it was interesting that some people received the notice in the mail and some didn't, and I'm getting.
Are you sure it didn't land in your spam box?
I looked everywhere. I got other emails from them that week, but not that one.
Okay.
So like I'm looking at this from like a meta superposition of like what are the various levels of the game, right? Like there's like, and this is where it comes to like mental compartmentalization, or like being of two or more than two minds about a same issue, right?
But you just said that you can't spell compartmentalization without mental. So does compartmentalization really accurately only describe a neurological sort of fragmentation, and then we misuse it when we take it outside of the mental frame?
Quite possibly. Good observation, right? So like for me, I'm like going, okay, like there's the level of like the experiential of like getting that email or being a YouTube user. And then there's this other thing where you're like, if you're above the game board and you're watching what is happening, right? Like the idea that some people would receive this notice and some don't, like on a more metaphysical level, like there's a couple of perceptions about that. One perception would be that they don't want you to know, or the other perception would be that those rules don't apply to you. A perception. I'm not saying that that's the reality.
I like your second perception way better. And I also think it speaks to the fact that we posted the exact same podcast and mine was censored and yours wasn't. So there's no consistency with you.
if we're in a big, huge game and YouTube is just one small part of it, or maybe even a feature of the game board, not the whole, sometimes we think that YouTube is like a main part of it, right? Maybe it's just a feature of it, right? Like then some of this stuff applies. And like one of the things, like you are more bothered by some of this censorship stuff than I am. But the reason is not that like I agree that I think censorship is like okay or good or moral or anything like that.
It's just that I have a worse attitude.
Well, but I think it's also like where you're at in your progression with your awareness of this stuff. And there was a time when that shit would have really irked me too, right? Like it would have really.
But you're not being censored is the other thing. You're not being targeted and censored. You're not having your platforms taken away from you.
Right. But so I think a lot of times what happens is when we worry about it or we talk about it, it draws the experience towards us because we're in a bigger YouTube is just a feature of the game.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And I also just want to toss in, I'm a journalist and I've been being censored since 2012. So it starts to get annoying when I'm living under the guise of freedom of speech, but that's not actually my experience. And I know what you're saying. You're not phased, so you don't attract it.
So you're also a journalist and there's a war on journalism going on. I don't consider myself a journalist or a truth teller or anything other than a person who says a lot of stuff on YouTube. And if people—
You're just a fucking icon, babe.
Right. I don't identify with some serious role or position, right? Like I don't. Like to me, this is all kind of like humorous and gibberish from my mind, and the fact that it resonates for some people, great. And if it doesn't, cool, right? But part of the reason I can take that attitude is because for myself, when I was going through these awarenesses about how reality and all this stuff work, I wasn't doing media, right? So like all my fears or my like things that I would get obsessed with or focused on during that time, I wasn't also dealing with them while trying to be a media personality in some way, right? And so like I figured out how this game worked a long time ago when I came to understand what the cellular contract was. Okay, so somebody who I used to listen to for like 2 weeks, who I would consider a non-information agent, right? There's misinformation, there's disinformation, and this person was so nonsensical that it was non-information, except for there was one thing that really resonated for me, and it stuck with me. And this person described how very early on, remember before they started calling them mobile phones, they called them cell phones and cellular networks and all that kind of stuff, right? And we all got our like Motorola or our Cellular One or whatever the companies were then, and we signed these contracts. And deeply embedded in those contracts that nobody read was basically granting permission to the whatever committees run all these waves in the air, that they had access to our cells and that we could not sue them for those damages. Okay, so I understood from that point when I heard this from somebody like in 2011 and 2012, that the moment we started using wireless technology, we had given over sovereignty of our bodies and our communication and all that kind of stuff, right? And so then like there's two things. There's like, okay, I'm going to spend my life making the focus of my life trying to like avoid, evade, or get away from that. And some people have done that, right? Or the other thing is, okay, well, I'm already in it, so I'm going to make use of the things that are useful to me, and also understand that that may come to an end at some point, and so I'm at peace with that and be okay with it, right? And so, like, when YouTube does all this stuff, like, it's not surprising to me. I already knew. I always knew they would do it. They've been doing it all along. It's just a more formalization of it, almost like it's a mockery of people, right? Like it's like literally they made a new rule that you can't talk about the election.
So you can't contest the legitimacy of the election, and you can't talk about how much fraud there was in this election, but you can talk about how, according to the New York Times, it's the safest election in history.
Right. My point is, if you can't talk about those things because those are the most important things about this election, you can't actually talk about the election, right?
What I love about it is the fact that they just laid down this rule is just another indication of how badly they're losing. Like, it just makes me laugh. I'm like, oh my God, truth and justice must be really, really triumphing right now if they're going to this level of ridiculousness.
Not only has no clothes on, but doesn't even own clothes anymore. Right? Like, it's just like to me, when you get to this level of naked censorship, it's funny. The kind that's really tyrannical is the kind that people don't know it's happening. So the kind of censorship that was occurring on YouTube 10 years ago, because there was some, right? There was some, it was rare, it was devious, and it was hard to notice, right? But that was the one that really started removing.
Started with Pizzagate. I feel like pizza, unless you noticed something early, oh, you saw it sooner?
Wait, like as early as like, I'd say the first real, this is the one that most people missed, and I think was actually the most significant step in YouTube censorship ever. Okay, now we're having that weird audio thing happen again. Okay.
I hear you just fine, if that's helpful at all, and your bars are fine.
Okay, your bars are good too. Okay, so when they removed the activity section, so there, I think I've talked about this before, but most people still, okay, like used to be, you know how like you have your like your recommended section, your subscriptions, your trending section, all that kind of stuff, right? There used to be one that said activity. And what
well, Facebook used to have that too. They all kind of have done away with it,
right,
except for Venmo, which makes no sense. Like, I don't want to know what my friends are doing with their money.
Right. So things that they shouldn't know, they're now knowing, and things that it would be good to know, we can't know. Right. So what this was is everybody you subscribed to, if they, as long as they had their account set to let people see my activity, like I'm sure there's some like secret porn addicts that didn't want us to see their shit, and so they mark it up. But basically, like, let's say there's somebody that
all porn addicts secret. I mean, is anyone really out about their porn addiction?
Right, whatever it is, you know what I mean. But like then, therefore, like let's say that I just discovered someone like back in the day, right? Like then I could go see all the videos that they were watching. So I suddenly could know everything they know without having to go through them. So it's the same process like knowing when you get access to like all the ancient religious texts, you don't have to go to the priest anymore to get permission to know things about the other side or whatever, right? Or like with this, like you can just open your business instead of having to ask the government permission. You can just now know all the things that people who you like find interesting know without having to ask them to tell you about it, right? Yeah. Kind of thing. So like to me, that was I spent way more time in the activity section than in the subscription section.
I get that, but I don't know that that actually counts as censorship. To just take away that feature, that isn't actually censorship. That's just annoying.
Okay, but it's something that people, it was a way of removing all of this access to information and knowledge without people recognizing that that's what it was doing.
Well, I hear what you're saying. I get how that was like a great shorthand, but I think in the grander conversation of censorship, I don't actually think that applies. It was just a shortcut to see what people were watching, but it would be censorship if they took those videos down that people watch. But since all the social media platforms have taken away, I don't know, I just feel like they're just always fucking with us so that we don't get used to anything.
By making a formal taking away of something that they're telling us about, we now know what to go look for. When they just removed the activity section, they removed a slice of access to, like, right? So we're talking about like very sly, secretive, devious censorship versus overt censorship, right?
I mean, well, let's define censorship, because in my mind, that isn't censorship. So how are you defining it?
Okay, so, okay. I have no idea what the actual given definition is, the new one, whatever new one that they've created for our Newspeak world, or the one that existed 20 years ago. But
right. Because the new one is probably going to include words like privilege and equity and all that shit.
Right. Yeah. And like evolutionary and you know, whatever.
Like supremacists, blah 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 blah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't.
Problematic, your favorite term.
I hate that. Like, so I don't know if, like, for me, I don't know if the important thing is to like, what do I consider to be censorship, as much as what do I consider the purpose of censorship to be? What do you consider the purpose of censorship to be?
To silence dissent and to silence truth and to make people stupid and easy to control.
Okay, so that's one definition of it, and that's the one that is like the obvious thing, right? Like the obvious thing that we all sort of know about, and what they lead us to believe censorship is actually about. But I think censorship has a much deeper and much more twisted and dark purpose, okay? And what that is when you can remove a word or an idea from a society, you can remove the ability for someone to have that experience.
Oh, totally. I talk about this in my quantum lane drink stuff all the time.
Yeah. So for me, like when you, like the way that I ever bumped up against this is if you ever watch like an old like Russian man, right, who came here like maybe when he was middle-aged or whatever, and he's trying to convey something to you, but we don't have an adage for that in English, but they had one in Russian. So he's trying to explain a concept to me. And even though he's saying the right words, I can't understand what he's talking about. And I watched him get like super duper frustrated because there's an experience, whether it's a mental or a psychological experience or a real world physical one, if you can't describe it to another person and that person has never experienced it or heard about it, they're not able to have it.
Right. Words establish existential isness and our mythologies. So when we remove those, then we don't have those narratives. We don't have those experiences. We don't have those people,
right.
et cetera, et cetera,
and
et cetera.
so the purpose of, in my opinion, of censorship is not necessarily to quash dissent. That's a feature of the bigger thing that they're doing. Or right, the idea is to limit the amount of experiences a person can have here. On this point.
I think it's all of it. I don't think it's either or. I think, yes, that is part of it. I think what I said is also part of it. But I don't think there's a difference between like taking something off of YouTube versus just making something harder to find on YouTube. And they are doing that. And that is like a realm of it that we can't deny is happening. But in my mind, and not to be argumentative, we still need to make up our we agree dance. This is not one of those instances, but I don't think taking away the activity piece is censorship, personally.
So to me, that was when that was when YouTube became like a lot less like useful and enjoyable and all that stuff for me. So like, because I like to go to like the more primary sources, like I'm not so interested in hearing. Like sometimes the way you find out about something is by hearing somebody talk about it, but I want to go to like the real research, right? So one of the things that's happening with YouTube now is a lot of the people who were like aggregators or synthesizers of information or of ideas, they have been deleted or censored. Right. But the actual information that they're talking about is still findable on YouTube for people who are willing to dig deeper into something. So that information or like the ideas don't not exist on YouTube, but the depository points where it's easy to find them have been removed.
Yes, and also a lot of the information has also been deleted from YouTube.
The information, it's not that you can't find that information anywhere on YouTube. You can't find it necessarily in its most easily digestible or apparent form.
No, I'm saying it's both. I'm saying what you're saying is correct, and they have also removed actual videos and information. Remember when we used to be able to find when Obama was running for like what, senator, and railing against about the borders and how strict he was going to be? That's not on YouTube anymore. That's gone from YouTube.
So that is still available on YouTube, but not under the titles one would normally look to search on.
Okay, well, what about Plandemic? What about Hold Up? Like YouTube has removed these.
Totally. But YouTube removed Plandemic from some people's channels, but not from other people's channels. Like it was very weird what they did with Plandemic.
But like Hold Up, which just came out this week, they pulled it down after 24 hours. You definitely cannot find that on YouTube.
Okay, for a long time I was able to find it on some channels, the Plandemic too anyway. But
you can find it on BitChute, but BitChute, which is a different conversation, which I hope we'll have today, is having its own censorship issues.
So, okay. So I think all these things we've talked about can qualify as like versions or forms of censorship, right?
Yes.
But for me, like I've understood for a really long time that was already happening on YouTube, that it would continue to happen. And like all of this stuff, the tyranny will become more naked, right? And at a certain point, I was offended by that. And later it became like more humorous to me because it's fucking plainly obvious. Like literally, like if I went to my dad and said to him now, like 20, 30 years ago, if I went to my dad and said, if they tell you, you can't talk about something on when you're teaching your class, or if you can't talk about something on the radio, what do you call that? He would say censorship, right? And now if I go to him and I say that they have said that you can't talk about, you know, the idea of election fraud or any of that stuff right now, what would you call that? He'd say smart. So, right, it's to the point now where people, they can do it nakedly, right? So like literally anybody who has any potential of being awake, right, at this point can see what's going on. And if you can't see what's going on, you have no potential of being awake. So that division that needs to happen is very clear now. It is no longer, there's no like hazy spot or confusion or whatever. I think this is a good thing.
I think it's a good thing too. And I think, you know, I deleted all my YouTube videos 2 weeks ago. And I had some, like, I did it on the fly. My gut was like, do it now. But you know, for a few days afterwards, I was like, did I make a mistake? Like, what did I do? And this was confirmation of like, yes, I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad this is happening. It's so, like, these days when it's that overt and they make these big sweeping moves, I know it's because they're sinking. And I'm like, great, this is fantastic. Right. Just let it crumble quickly.
Yeah, so it's all, but like there's a couple that like where most of the censorship is happening now is around the election and around the virus, right? Okay, and but like if you're not interested in those topics, which I pretty much am not interested in those topics, there's tons of amazing information still available on YouTube, right? And every time a person spends time like rewatching or listening to another person reiterate what they already know to be the truth about the election or the virus or whatever, they're not looking at some of the magical information that's available, right? So
well, that's another point of this whole, you know, this conflation of so many psyops is to distract us from the awesomeness around us.
Yes, and so to me, like this is kind of, and this goes also for like restrictions that are in place based on travel. Like you hear a lot of airlines saying they're not going to let people like travel on what they don't have a vaccine or they don't take a test and have an immunity passport. And of course, the part of me that knows the difference between right and wrong is like, that is wrong. I don't like that. And then there's another part of me that goes, this is the bigger system, the bigger, like the higher gods, the higher version of ourselves, the highest part of the universe, challenging us to expand the way we think about travel. Learn to teleport, learn to be in multiple places, bilocate, like to really hone our skills and abilities that we haven't been forced to because we've been coddled with all of these technologies that the powers that shouldn't be provide for us, right? So to me, it's like, you know, when it's, when YouTube is being this naked and blanketly ridiculous, it's like, okay, like, you know, like that's a foregone conclusion, and that we know that there was, you know, nonsense going on. If we're not allowed to talk about it, right? It provides hilariousness because you get to hear Robert talking about erection integrity. So that's humor, and humor is the grease that really gets things moving in our favor, right? And like, awesome. Now I don't have to spend any more time, because even as someone like me, I'm still tempted to watch some of those videos where they're complaining about the election. I don't have to waste any more time watching videos where people are reiterating things that I already know to be true.
Well, YouTube isn't my number one. I mean, since I've been off anyway, like I'm looking at library, I'm looking at BitChute, so I still have access to what I want to have access to. And like you with censorship, that's me with vaccines. And I've done deep, like I know about how shitty vaccines are, but when people talk about it and mandatory vaccination and the, you know, all this, that's where I just laugh. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. This isn't happening. I'm not going to give it 1 ounce of my anger because it's so freaking absurd. But the other piece is that I totally appreciate the languaging of the powers that shouldn't be. And from a languaging standpoint, it still legitimizes their power because it's saying they are, but shouldn't be. So I'm still lobbying for you, me, and all of us. The powers that were, let's past tense them. They're done, shouldn't be. They're just not.
The powers that once thought they were, or something like that.
The powers that were, just they're done. They're done. The powers that were.
Yeah. So anyway, so to me, it's like, you know, I see it from many different levels, right? And so for me, the whole thing with YouTube is like, even if I get to a place where all I do on YouTube is make a commercial for my content that will be available elsewhere, there's still people, like YouTube is still the easiest to navigate for me when I'm out exercising and I'm trying to, right? The way that feed works, it's easier than trying to go to a website and get on something else and blah, 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 right?
Right. But here's the thing with YouTube, which I'm guessing most people did not read their new terms of service that they sent out that went into effect on the 18th, which is not just that they could take down your videos or your channel at any time for no reason whatsoever. They can take down your Google account. So they can take down your Gmail, they can attack your Google Docs. So for me, it just felt like, well, that gives them too much access. And I understand why Google and Gmail are problematic, and forgive me for using that word. And I just felt like, since I'm already getting strikes and they're already restricting access and fucking with me, I don't need to have them, give them the ability to mess with my email and my docs and all of that.
The one that I can't think of actually a more perfect use in the word problematic in association with Gmail and Google. That would be the correct use of the term problematic, right? But also,
right.
like, your reality is much more centered on the necessity of email and documents and things like that because they're things to do. I don't care about that shit. Like for me, like I have other email accounts as well, and like it wouldn't be the end of the world to me if like I hate checking my email, right? And I don't like writing or typing things, and so for me, YouTube is a much more valuable tool than Gmail or Google Docs.
So the other piece is that, and this was in the YouTube and it's also in the new Instagram, Facebook, which those go into effect December 20th, that we waive our rights to ever sue them, to ever be a part of any class action suits, that we have any disputes, they will only be settled through a mediator in small claims court. And I know that Ted Cruz and these other senators are working so hard to bring down big tech. And I just felt like on a larger scale of integrity, not that I would sue, I'm not litigious, I have no interest in that system, but I just felt like, no, I don't want to weaken the great work that they're doing by signing off on that.
Yeah, I guess from like I'm not a big user of Facebook other than to post shows. Like I don't use it to keep in touch with friends or to, like put my thoughts out or anything like that. And so for me, it just performs like a single function, really. You know what I mean? And like I said, like no, at the moment I signed up for Facebook, did I know what bullshit it was? No, but when I had that awareness in 2011, based on this thing that this dumb person said that made me like, it just did something to my mind. It wasn't even the truth of what she said, right? Like I've understood that that's what's happening. You know what I mean? And so like, I guess, I'm not shocked or like offended by it anymore because I was offended by it then. And when I was offended by it, I was like, nobody else was offended by it. So I looked like a crazy, insane person talking about how like literally one day Facebook is going to exist in our eyeballs. And then people thought I was insane, and now it's like obvious.
Right. No, I get it. And I'm not, like, everyone can do what they're going to do. And I had the thought when I got off YouTube that I would also get off of Instagram and Facebook before December 20th to be an integrity there. And I've had enough signs and input that in the grand scheme, it's not smart. But I think we all need to be realistic about where we're out of integrity. What's so funny?
I just was thinking about Robert and the erection integrity. And I was just going to say humorously that there is no more being out of integrity. The only integrity that exists anymore is erection integrity and no other integrity. But
I do feel like we need to take responsibility, and there is the matter. And I'm not saying that I'm not acting hypocritically here because I do still have Instagram, but we're signing on to things that are not okay. Like, it's just not okay. And granted, it's a free platform, so there are other pieces, but I would like us to just not be so capricious about it. Like, oh, I know, and it doesn't matter. It actually does matter. And that doesn't mean that there's an easy solution. But as a content creator, I can't pretend that I don't have misgivings and that I'm not confused and ambivalent about it, because, like, big tech is out of control, and what they've done with this election and how they're fucking, with surveillance and all of it, like, it's a problem. And if we all waive our rights to take any legal action because it's just easier that way, I don't know. I don't know that that's the best way for us to go. Yeah, and I'm not saying I have the answers. I'm just saying I would like us to be a little bit more realistic.
Yeah, I think it's a problem when people either don't know or don't care. But I think like once like as long as you kind of are intentional in how you're choosing to position yourself in relation to what this thing is, right? And I think for a lot of people, like they're aware that when they're in, like, as Jeff would say, when they're on Facebook or when they're on Instagram or Twitter, they're in somebody else's game, and that person has rules and laws to their game, and you're choosing to be in it. You can leave anytime, right? You're choosing to be in it. And then, like for each of us to have sort of rules and laws of our game. And when one of the rules and laws of the other's game too drastically offends ours, then it's time to step away. And that needs to be a conscious decision. And that's at a different point for everybody.
Right.
That's at a different point.
But indemnify, it's like, it's a big problem in the vaccine industry is that they're indemnified. You cannot, even before this bullshit C-19 fakery happened, all the pharmaceutical companies were indemnified from big lawsuits, which is why vaccine court exists, which is why anyone who thinks vaccines are a good idea needs to understand why do vaccine courts exist. So now, basically, by all of us signing on to what's happening at YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, we're indemnifying them. And the only way to have an impact with these people is money. And we've just signed that away. So we have to be realistic about it. You didn't read them, so you didn't know this. And I'm guessing most people didn't read them.
I did read them. I read it after you told me. I went and I looked at them. But like when some of these agreements are like 950 pages, I don't read them. But if they're anything less than like 10 or 12 pages, I generally will at least go through and read, read them. But, like I think the thing with the vaccines is like that same point to me is like where, okay, if they're saying you can't talk about election fraud, right, then they're obviously admitting that there was, right? So to me, it's that same point, and people who then like who refuse to look at that, they're not going to wake up. They're just not going to. So I don't have to waste my time.
But you got to look at it if you're a mother and you, in good faith, take your child to the doctor for their vaccines, and then that child becomes autistic or severely retarded. I think I said artistic, but I meant autistic.
That was actually really poetic because a lot of the autistic kids are really artistic. So
they are, but the thing is if all of a sudden you take your child in, or I've heard cases of 2, 3, 4 children, and they become, mentally and physically crippled, and now your life, this is going to cost you millions and millions of dollars, but you're not allowed to sue these companies who lied to you about the safety. That's a problem. That's a real deal problem.
Yeah, like I think that we have gotten to this place as a society where most people have no understanding of anything that's going on around them. And so I think like that until that big enough wake up call comes, right? Like we're going to see increasingly gross expressions of this problem. And the one you're talking about is a particularly disgusting one. And like some of the stuff that I've been becoming to understand recently about the nature of our reality, like really put some of this stuff in perspective, right? Like it seems to be, and this is like why we get these ridiculous like psychological operations that are also actually real, like the Great Reset kind of thing, right? Because like there is a reset to the natural system. It's a natural, organic, technological, like basically like energetic reset of things. Okay. And
like 12/21, December 21st is that is the culmination of a 6,000 year cycle. That's a legitimate natural reset that is happening.
Right. And there's smaller cycles within that. And with each of these, there's like a lot of die-off. Right. And this is part of that cycle, and it takes a different expression in every iteration of the cycle. Right. And in this one, it happens to be a lot of political corruption and a lot of degradation of our bodies based on technology and GMOs and all this kind of stuff. Right. But with these resets, only so many people can survive. And in this case, it's going to be the people who are able to inform themselves and come to terms with that reality and be able to position themselves. And that doesn't mean like you have to like run out into the woods and avoid everything, but understand how to strategically position yourself and know what things to put your energy and faith into and what things not to, and like what you're actually looking at when you bump up against some of these things that we're talking about, right? And it's not, it's knowing things and then understanding how to surf that informational ocean, right? How to keep yourself informed without letting it overwhelm you is a really important skill to develop. Right.
I agree. But I also think it's important. I think another piece, just in terms of these user agreements, is to be able to get a wide angle lens on where we're headed and what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not, like the new AAA user agreement.
Yeah.
Did I tell you about this one?
Yeah. Tell the people though, they don't know.
Okay, so the new AAA one says that not only can they share informations of your transactions with any entity they want to without letting you know, but they can share details of your personal experience. So that means if the tow truck driver like has an attitude problem, didn't like you for some reason, saw Biden, you know, bumper sticker in your car, they can report that to other groups. So this is paving the way for this gross social credit system. So it's like people need to be aware of like, oh, I don't understand why they do that. That wouldn't bother me. Who cares? You know, it's like what's been going on with surveillance. Like, who cares? They can collect anything they want on me. It's like, yeah, but why are they doing it? And what are they going to do with that information at some point? So it's another piece of like educating ourselves as to like what is really going on and where our world is going and how the powers that were are trying to fuck with us.
So like, I think the level of awareness that I'm talking about is like, okay, so we have all this stuff that suddenly we've decided over the last 20 years or so, we've decided is necessary to our experience here on Earth, like social media, right? Like whatever kind of thing. So most people, not all, most people can't afford to pay for every fucking service, right? So that's how we got like, oh, these things were free. Now we realize, oh, maybe things free isn't so good. But like, if I were to try and move to paid versions of all these things right now, I couldn't afford it, right? All right, it's not in my budget right now. Put it that way. It's not in my budget right now. Okay. Like I know other people who pay for every service they use. Right. And so even if it's still one of these services that we talk about as being corrupt, once you are paying for something, that sort of metaphysically changes the rules and laws of the game anyway. Right. So for me, there are certain things that I think are worth paying for, or that are important enough to me, that the integrity around them, that I'm going to pay for them. And these other things that I continue, some things I won't, like I don't use Twitter, I don't use Twitter, not because I think it's more corrupt than Facebook, but it was like, I never used Twitter as much and I decided not to extend my bullshit situation into another thing. I don't really use Instagram, like a little bit, but not really, I'm not invested in that. If they close my account or took it away, I don't care, right? So like I'm limiting the number of those holes, open holes. I'm plugging up the ones that are the most valuable to me. And the others that are open, I use them understanding what the reality of them is. And when something about it steps into a place that I'm like, that's too far for me kind of thing, then I will stop. Or, right. And I also like will accept gracefully if they decide to delete me from their platform, right? Because, you know, or whatever it is. But like, you know, it's I think each one is a personal decision. It's not that it's morally right to do one or not the other. We all have to decide which games we're going to play, which risks we're going to take, which ones we're not, how we're going to deal with some of these things, what we're willing to pay for, what things we're not willing to pay for, how much are we willing to pay, who are we willing to pay. Like one of the things that went down early in like the lockdown kind of stuff, right? When it was like, okay, you and I had these conversations when we were like, you know, like, are we bowing down by wearing, am I bowing down by wearing a mask? They didn't make any sense to me. So there's a company that like here, every place was doing masks here. There was not some good little private grocer that I could go to, right? So do I put on the mask, right? Or at least to get by the front door, and then I tend to pull it and push it and play with it and take it off and put it in my pocket and pull it, whatever, right? Do I make this thing? I'm not going in there except to wear a mask. But then ultimately I end up having to order groceries from that company anyway, and it costs 30% more to to order from them. Like I'm not right. So like we had to think through these things, and I think all of this is just for each person strategic in a different way. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things about this time is seeing how different people navigate it. And when you see somebody who's surfing with their own personal flair, those are the people you want to learn something from. And you can add that to your repertoire of how you surf challenging waves. Like when I don't go to parties very often anymore because there's no parties now, but even before that, it's like difficult for me because like the mind control cult's going on there, I'm not so cool with and whatever, even though I like the music and you know all that stuff. But like when I would watch a lot of poppers early on and when I was like really picking up and developing my own dance style, I'd see like every once in a while someone do a move that I thought was really cool. And like I'd try to replicate it. And I would get frustrated when I couldn't perfectly replicate it. But then at a certain point I started to recognize, oh, like something else developed out of it that doesn't look exactly like what they do, but actually looks really cool also and is my own twist on what they do, right? Like you'll appreciate this. There's in gymnastics, they will name skills after people. And there was a release move that was really super popular in the 70s called the Delchev, right? And it was like this thing where you kind of tap down and do a half turn and then like a front flip and re-catch the bar. Some people would cross their hands to do it. Some people wouldn't. There's two ways to do it, right? And there's a gymnast named Eberhard Ginger who kept trying to do a Delchev but couldn't do it. But what he ended up was with this like flyaway half turn re-catch the bar that's called the Ginger, right? That it does the same thing. It's a flip with a half turn and a re-catch, but it's like the angle that the turn happens at and where the flip occurs is different. And in my opinion, like the Ginger's a really exciting move. They're both exciting moves for different reasons, right? But the only reason he got to the Ginger was because he was trying to do the del chip and couldn't do it, right? And so that's how I developed a lot of my own dance style. But I think also like watching the way people navigate this stuff, like in the beginning, like one of the people who I've watched and like totally admire, even though like we maybe agree on some things, but for totally different reasons, is Peggy Hall. At the beginning, I was like, I'm not watching that shit people are sending me, because it's all the fucking people who want to go and yell and scream about how unfair all this is who are sending me her shit. But then I kind of watched her and the way she handles
positive. She's so happy.
She smiles. She does it with panache and flair and whatever, right? And so I was like, okay. So I started paying attention to stuff. And then I should request an interview with her. But then I started watching her stuff. And I like learned that like the main reason she doesn't want to wear a mask is because she sees it as a demonic ritual and she doesn't want to participate in it because she's an evangelical Christian, right? I'm not a Christian and I don't think about those things or care about those things or anything else like that. But I just don't want to wear a mask because I don't want to. So why don't she and I team up, and she supports people who don't want to wear masks just because they don't want to, and I'll support her right to not wear a mask because she thinks it's a demonic ritual, right? Like we can support each other's reasons for the same thing. But also I came to recognize that like any person who, like so many people who are mask Nancy's say that they're not religious, right? But wearing a mask, the elites who are—
it's a religion.
It's a religion, because like if you, all of a sudden, we'd never heard of this stuff until a while ago, and now you're like person non grata if you don't do it. But with the social distancing, they don't just say social distance, they say practice social distancing. You practice a religion. And if you are practicing social distancing, you are religious. I have news for you, right? So while I don't care about what Christians think about demons or religious practices, I also don't want to be sucked into participating in a religious ritual of the elite that this is all, right? So it's like, there's all this stuff that we kind of commingle on, even though she and I have completely different takes on what reality is and what the purpose of being here is. And I love the panache and the smile, and she has flair, and you know, she doesn't get mad and whatever. And I was like, that's cool. I can respect that. She's doing it. She is surfing her ocean with style and grace, and it's different than I do it. But I can appreciate another person with her own sort of stylistic flair, you know? Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. And like Jeff, like the way Jeff does some of this stuff, I'm like, dude, that's fucking retarded, right? But like, he might do things that like 9 times out of 10, I'll be like, dude, that's fucking retarded, or no, you're carrying that too far, or whatever. But every once in a while, he has one where I'm like, yeah, that's a good one. I'm going to do that one. You know what I mean? Like, he laughs at me when I get mad because my phone does shit I don't want it to do, right? Like, this is my phone. I paid for it. I didn't, you know, if the phone was free and it did whatever it wanted, fine, but I paid for it. So like, I want it to do what I want it to do. And it's so funny when I get mad and I'm like, fuck you, I paid $1,000 for this. It should do what I, you know. So I get irritated with him, but every once in a while he comes up with one of these theories on navigating this, and I'm like, oh, that's fucking good. I like it, right? So we just, you know, everyone has to decide what works for them and learn from each other about it. So yeah. All right, are we done with YouTube?
Okay, one thing I want to say about, I mean, as far as this new thing, it was my favorite Styx Hex and Hammer ever. If you guys watch him, check out his, because I know everyone has their little take on this one, but it was like Styx in his finest hour. I don't know if this is off topic to talk about since I've left YouTube, what my experience on BitChute is.
So let's go there next, but if you have anything else to say about YouTube, let's wrap up YouTube and then we can move to BitChute.
I just think it's hilarious. Also, while you were out of town, because I know you were on sort of a more media blackout, I was really geeking out on the Senate hearings with Jack Dorsey and whoever the head of YouTube and Zuckerberg was. But I mean, I love this one because the head of YouTube, you know, like Jack always looks terrified, right? Like he's peeing in his pants and he's clearly in over his head and he cannot handle this. And he's just like this. Zuckerberg is like not human, right? He's like a bot. He's like a less attractive Musk. You know, I don't even know what he is. But then you have the head of YouTube who has like some personality and some sophistication. And he's like, oh, no, we never censor anything. And so I just love the like blatant lie that this points out, the blatant hypocrisy, I think is awesome.
We should look at what the legalese definition of censor is to understand what definition that they're working with, right? Because there could be, you know, there could be a different definition of it that we're assuming because we're not understanding which jurisdiction it's being discussed in, that we think we know what
Right.
the means, but we don't.
Oh, that's the other thing about YouTube's new terms of service is they only the laws of California are what apply. And I just love that Gavin Newsom seems to be like one of the slimiest, creepiest of all the governors. And YouTube's like, when it comes down to it, whatever California says is going to be our law.
Yeah, because California is essentially like a satellite of the Chinese Communist, party. So yes.
It's just the West Coast China. Yeah, Western coast.
It's kind of like how Israel is the United States empire satellite over there in the Middle East. Yeah, the same kind of thing. The other person who's just so gross is Eric Garcetti. Did you see him like laughing while he was announcing the lockdown? Robert's like, he has Duper's delight, dude. He can't help but giggle and laugh as he's announcing it's time to cancel everything. He's all excited and giddy.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought that up because there's Garcetti's Psycho, which is very similar to Bill and Melinda. Like, wait till the second one. Like, they can't even try to act normal. And then I don't know if you saw Cuomo freaking out and like totally shaming a journalist and his constituents. And then here in New Mexico, our governor, now her standard issue address is like this angry demon face yelling shame. So it's interesting, these leaders who've lost any ability to even appear leader-like. Like their true colors are really coming out, and it's very amusing.
I remember when I used to do drugs, having to like learn how to control myself when I was in a serious situation, right?
They need to learn. They need to learn, but they don't know how.
Yeah. So I was like, wow, they must either be on some really strong drugs that they can't control, or this is like a deep level of like psychopathy or like narcissism or unempathy that even like the deepest dredges of drug use can't tap in a person, right?
I think it's what it is. I think once they pulled, because we know that they've been planning this for so long. So I think once that they're like, all right, we're actually gonna do it, like I imagine when you kill someone, like remember in A Clockwork Orange, how like when they're, they break into the house and they're wrecking everything and they're like tormenting the people, there's this like crazy glee. It's like I've crossed this line into evil and now the gloves are off and I'm just gonna be a total psychopath. Yeah.
No, and we live in a very digital world now, right? So this is like the digital crime scene, right? Like the internet, YouTube, Facebook, right? It's like formerly what like the Tate Bianca murder scene was, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Anywho, okay. So let's move on to BitChute, because you have feelings about BitChute.
I have BitChute, and I also want to mention Weinstein and Twitter. I'm just we can bookmark that.
I have feelings about BitChute too, but I'm sure they're probably different feelings.
Okay, so I said, I left YouTube on a dime. It was like censored in the morning, restricted. I read the new terms of service. My gut said, get off. I'm like, that's crazy. I checked with my pendulum twice. It's like, get off, do it now. So I get off, and then I'm in the scramble of like, okay, I got to get stuff up, my business, blah, 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 blah. So I just went to BitChute. I did some research on like brand new tube. They don't take MP4s. I liked that BitChute was stored offshore. I read their terms of service. It just felt, this is a good free speech platform and I'm not going to be fucked with. So I had loaded about 30 something videos and I realized, I have this video on the homepage of my quantum languaging site. I need to get that live quickly. So I sent the BitChute link to my web guy in LA, who's been my friend for 20 years. He's a yogi. He's a Libra. He's very sweet, very heartfelt, very like tender, sort of mild-mannered, nice, sweet person. So I sent him the link and he messages me back and he's like, why are you choosing this website? This is an alt-right conspiracy site. Are you on board with their platform? And I'd heard this when I had sent my mentor, who started the LA Weekly, the link to Plandemic, and he sends me back a Wikipedia article, and then he explains that he refuses to watch anything on BitChute because it's an alt-right Nazi platform. And I'm like, dude, I'm your friend. I made this movie. I'm telling you it's not. I'm telling you it's not alt-right. So I said the same thing to my web guy. I said, well, I respect your perspective. He also sent me the Wikipedia entry, and we all know that Wikipedia is a goddamn joke.
Wikipedia is begging for donations this week.
Why? They're funded by Goldman Sachs and the New York Stock Exchange and Soros and Clinton, and what the fuck?
They're in an emergency situation, and if they don't get enough money raised this week, they're gonna, yeah.
That's hilarious. Okay, that's it. Let's just bookmark that, because that's a show in and of itself. But so I said to him, well, you know, like, I respect your perspective, but they don't curate content. Like, they just let anyone put on whatever, and I just need a free speech platform, and I've already loaded this many videos, so I'm gonna go with it. And he pushed it, and he sent me 2 other emails saying, like, you really need to change your mind on this. And I was already kind of in a freak out place of like, what did I just do, and trying to get these loaded. And
whenever somebody tells me that I need to change my mind on something, right? I need to change my mind like that, right? Like, no, like, you know, if I think you're wrong about something, then be like, you know what? I'm struggling to understand why you think so. So let me tell you what I know, and then you can see how you feel. And if you want to change your mind, you can. Right? But you need to change your mind on something. Wow. This is a
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So of course, you know me, that was my attitude. And I'm like, fuck it. Like, I'm not going to be a slave to this propaganda smear campaign. And I went ahead and put everything on BitChute. But here's what I learned from being on BitChute. And I'm still on BitChute. I'm going to stay on BitChute, but I also have made another move. So 2 things. You can't get to BitChute through Safari, they block it. You can't get to BitChute on your iPhone, they block it. So right then and there, I'm like, okay, that sucks for people who don't know about DuckDuckGo. Like, it's not really that convenient. But then the other part, which is true, and you know that I'm a free speech advocate. I want people to say whatever they want at all times. I'm never gonna back down on that. But I will say the comments that started to show up on my videos were very anti-Semitic and very anti-Jew. And I think it's very important in the scheme of public discourse that that is allowed. Like, I'm very grateful because I know where people stand. If someone makes a comment on my video that I'm an idiot because I'm a Jew, I want to know that that's where they think. I'm not going to fight with them, you know, like, that's its own inculcation. That's fine. But upon scrolling through the comments that appeared, I did feel like I was taking a walk through a very bad neighborhood, very late at night. Yeah. And just realized, and again, I'm all for free speech. So I will fight to the death for people's right to say anti-Semitic shit to me. But it was a little bit creepy. So that, it wasn't even that, but Safari blocking it and iPhone blocking it, I set up an Odyssey library account, and I really, really like that platform. And I really like the people who are running that platform. But I just wanted to share, because I know a lot of our audience is in this free speech conversation, and a lot of us are going to BitChute. And I feel like it's troublesome that the powers that were are going out of their way to demonize and to censor. And it wasn't really as fun and free as I thought it was going to be. No fault of BitChute.
Right. Okay. So a couple of things. So first of all, like, it's already long been determined that you and I are alt-right Nazis. So BitChute's probably the place for us to be. Right. Second of all, as far as I'm aware, the alt-right doesn't even really exist anymore. It's become pretty defunct. So it's interesting that BitChute is gaining high popularity as an alt-right website when alt-right had been really ceased to exist for probably at least 2 years now, in my opinion.
Well, keep in mind, that's the propaganda smear campaign. Like, they're not promoting themselves as alt-right, and everyone in our conversation knows that nothing of our conversation is alt-right. It's just what the mind-controlled masses like to parrot.
Right. So there's that. And then I'm trying to address the things in the order that you brought them up so that I can keep track of them in my mind. So there's that, first of all. Okay, so that's kind of funny that, like, that, right? All right. So then, to me, that it's hard to find, right? And that it's like, and this will go into some of my complaints about BitChute, but they're not really complaints, right? That actually, to me, is more of an assurance that it's secure place for people like us to put open-minded content. Right? Because, okay, so for me, my complaint for it is that it doesn't actually list the videos in the order that I loaded them, right? Like, if you try, like, if they don't go in right the order that you load them, it's like
hard to load. It's hard, like, it takes a really long time, and they don't always load. So then you have to go back and reload it, but now it's out of order.
Right, and it seems to like the same one, I have problems trying to load the same ones over and over and the ones that, right? So like, I don't know what it, with no awareness as to like, is it because there's maybe a dead link in the description? Like what is the thing that causes the loading problem? I don't know. And then it doesn't load them in order and there's no way to reorganize them into order. So that's like, that's annoying, but to me that also is like really if what we are looking for is a safe deposit of our place. Like I have all my shit backed up to hard drives. It's not organized. Haven't had time to do that, right? So I have to go digging around looking for shit and whatever, but I know it's all there. So if I have to find it, it is there, right? And I'm choosing not to do those things until that becomes, right? Like the way that I'm moving my shit over now is just by downloading it from YouTube and sending it over to BitChute. I'm not going through my downloaded archives, even though I have them. Right.
Apparently on library, you can migrate your whole channel. So
okay.
You might want to look into that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to finish. I'm about a little over halfway through moving my things over to BitChute because I took a break. And I spent a couple days where I spent all day doing it and it turned me into an insane monster. So
oh my God, it's so frustrating.
Day, otherwise I will lose my mind.
Yeah, it's definitely mind losing.
So that's my complaints about BitChute, right? But
the other thing is they don't give you notifications when you get comments, and library doesn't either, which is kind of a bummer.
For me, that's fine. I don't really want to know. I don't like part of me.
But when you migrate your whole channel and all of a sudden you have like 200 videos there because you haven't been tracking, like it's different on YouTube because on YouTube we've been keeping up a little bit. But it was a little overwhelming. I
don't look at a lot of comments. Like there's part of me that feels like, sometimes I feel like turning the comments off, right? And other times I decide now I'm just going to leave them. But I look a little bit sometimes, but I go through long periods of time where I don't look at comments. So the comment section isn't that important to me. But so for me, I'm looking at BitChute as not a place to really expand my stuff, but a safe harbor, a place that I can leave it where it has all of the like inconveniences and annoyances of like a person that you actually trust. Like people who are trustworthy generally are not like perfect in their organization of things and they do some things that annoy me and bother me, but when it comes right down to it, I know I can trust them. So
I totally agree, but here's the thing. They took BitChute down. Right. Was it during the election or after? Right. And and again, like I'm on board with you. Like all those reasons, I'm like, this is why I like it. I like that my shit is out of order and that they don't curate. It feels safer. But what I liked about Odyssey Library, which I know you like about Twitch, is it's one piece of the blockchain that actually makes sense to me, that if they get censored or taken down, our content still exists because it's stored in the blockchain.
Right. So, okay. So I think I'm pretty much done with it. So BitChute is totally imperfect, but in some ways it makes it like, I'm okay with that. It's like the underground parties, they get shut down sometimes. It's not like when you go to a concert and it always works out. Right, it's like it gets shut down sometimes, or you have to move it to another location, or whatever. That it requires some like finagling and patience, but to me that's like better. So that's my feeling about that. And then as far as some of these other like, okay, so like any of these other sites that are offering us some of this seamless type experience like YouTube, I think we have to be suspicious that eventually they will become like YouTube.
I think so as well, which is why I was looking into all the user agreements first. And I think honestly, and I really did my research on this. I watched a couple of John Corbett's interviews about it and I checked in with Styx. And for people making content like us right now, we need to be on multiple platforms just to be safe. It has to be spread out because you don't know what's going to be taken down, what's going to be co-opted.
As soon as I'm done loading my stuff to BitChute, I'll start finding another one to also load. We're so spreading it out places. But like, I think that like, these platforms that are able to provide such a seamless experience like tend to be the ones that get taken over, right? And then you get sucked into something. So we have to be just as suspicious of Library and Odyssey as we have become of YouTube, right? Until it bears out that it's something different than that, right? And so, yeah, so, but also like, I don't know that like for me, for the rest of my life, posting videos and having that be like the main part of my like way I make a living or my existence. I would like to take a lot of this into a much more real world setting, right? And so like, while I want to have my work backed up for posterity, you know what I mean? So like, for, so that there's always some record of the things that I've done. Like, I also know that like, if this sort of, for whatever reason, comes to an end for a variety of possible reasons, like that might be the sign to me that to move on to the next portion of what I do.
1,000%. I've also had it in my head quite a lot recently as far as what the hell is going to happen on December 21st with these convergences if the whole internet isn't about to just go away, which I think would be fucking awesome for humanity.
It's possible that the internet will go away. I know that there's also like, you know, there's a lot of, and it's not being talked about very much, Internet 2 is being developed, which seems like it might be more of like, you got to pay for everything, but it actually is going to be a secure internet, right? And at this point, like I might be okay with that. Like rather than having like 9 million platforms I use for different things and websites I go to, just picking a handful of things that I think are really useful and paying for them and knowing that my relationship with them is secure based on the fact that I've paid for them. You know, kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of things like coming, and I think the thing that we need to understand is I don't think any of these things are going to be like this immediate thing. I think we're in a transitional period that's been going on for a number of years and will continue for a number of years. So I don't know that it'll be like the internet's gone, but I think over the course of a decade.
But that's what's so exciting about December 21st. It really, truly might be. It might just be it's all gone.
But remember, on December 21st, 2012, we thought that was going to happen. And people were like, man, nothing happened. I beg to differ. I think there was a huge shift in like the mentality of some people. Like, I think that was really where like the split came about, people who were going to be able to wake up or just not going to be able to. Like, there was no immediate consequence to it that you could observe, but some adjustments had taken place in the consciousness or the mental processes of some people by that point, or it hadn't. And then it started that sort of fork. And I think this may be like either the sort of conclusion of that cycle or a deeper divide, like, right, a wider forking to the kind of, you know, thing where it's just like, you know, sometimes like you're on the freeway and there's been a split where like there's one of those cement lanes between different lanes that are still traveling in the same direction. So you can't get into each other's lanes anymore, but you're still sort of going in the same direction but separated. And then at a certain point it forks off and there's the hard split. So I think 2012 might have been the first, like the introduction of the cement barrier. And then at this point there may be like the absolute fork in the road where you can't even see the people that are
I think that's spot on. I think that is what's going on.
So I think it's going to be something like that. And I think the ramifications of it will be felt and we'll come to terms with slowly over the course of like somewhere between 10 and 25 years. I don't think it's going to be that like on December 22nd, like my dad's not going to be there anymore, right? But like the separation has already like begun, right? And like it becomes like concrete in terms of like the direction it's going, even though for a while we'll still be able to wave at each other.
Let's have a wager on this, because I think it is going to be, and maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I think it's going to be concrete and drastic, and like the laws of physics and nature as we know them are about to completely upend themselves and shift in a way that we nenever imagined.
Do you think it'll be changed so like time will become linear? So like instead of it being like we drive from like Chatsworth to Northridge, we'll move from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, like temporality will become spatial and vice versa, like there'll be that kind of flip?
I don't know what that means. But I do believe I sent you the video about what's happening in the realms. So I do think that like the people who are asleep and clearly lobbying for slave world are going to be pushed to the outermost edges, to a realm that is actually physically separate from our realm. And I think we're going to be operating with new powers and abilities that are going to make us a very different species than that which we left behind. How it's going to affect time space, I don't even understand how time space operates in this dimension with my little third dimensional monkey brain. So it's very hard for me to conjecture. Yeah, I think you have a firmer like multi-dimensional grasp on that, but maybe.
Yeah. So like I always talk about this, but like I used to struggle with getting places on time until I changed my attitude about it. Like instead of it being like, oh my God, I have to get there by noon, it was like, it will become noon when I get there, which is another way of saying like instead of saying, fuck, I don't have enough time to travel the 30 miles to Thousand Oaks. Instead of being like Thousand Oaks is 30 miles away, Thousand Oaks is at noon. So when I get to Thousand Oaks.
Does that work?
It does work.
I know a couple time wizards who just have a different, and it's in the mind, right? You decide, I'm going to relate to time differently, exactly like you did. And people like you they just have a completely different relationship to time. I think it's fucking awesome.
Yeah, and I, you know, like just also like the amount of time it takes for some people to like cover certain distances, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, have you ever, like, I don't know, when I was little, I remember it took about 8 hours to get to San Francisco, and now it takes 5, right? So there's something.
I don't ever remember it taking 8, but I'm also not surprised that like your version of time space changed so drastically.
So like, did the Earth expand? Did I become a different? Is there a difference in the way that I like traverse a certain amount of space, like land kind of thing? Because a million possibilities as to why that is. Also a similar thing with Las Vegas. Like I remember Las Vegas being about 3 hours away. Now it's about 4 to 5 hours away, right? And there's other places that, like, so like San Francisco got closer and Vegas got farther away. Like, you know, what, you know, like there was, you know, I don't know what like there was a time when I was much more interested in San Francisco than I am now, right? So maybe it seemed like it was harder to get there because I wanted to, and like I wasn't interested in Vegas, and now Vegas is kind of more interesting to me than San Francisco. I don't know if that plays into, I don't know, right? But I'm always acutely aware of what my relationship is with time and with space and how you can play with those, right? And like, do you remember when we were little, like how there was the trend of like reversible jackets?
Yes.
Right? It's kind of like that, right? Like when you change something temporally, it also changes something spatially. So you turned the jacket inside out, and it also went now from being red to blue. Like one side was red, one side was blue, right? So like there was multiple changes, not just one. It isn't, you know, whereas with the regular jacket now, it's like just inside out. It's like the same thing, but you can see the tag. Like this changed everything about the jacket.
Right.
So it's just, I loved reversible jackets when I was little. I thought they were so cool.
I just remember it from Grease too, when what Michelle Pfeiffer like went from her pink lady jacket to like a leather jacket.
Where the fuck did she go?
Oh, she's on Instagram, and she's like every Hollywood elite card. They're all programmed the same.
Laura and I were talking about the other day. It's like, yeah, you never hear about Michelle Pfeiffer anymore. Remember how hot like she was for a while? She was like
she's still gorgeous.
Right.
I think she has a perfume company now, and her husband's some sort of famous writer, director, something, but she's just spewing the like, wear a mask, Biden's amazing, but me too, pronouns, like same. They're all the same.
It's fucking hilarious. But there's a beautiful truth in it, right? Like they've always been mind controlled, questionably, possibly clones, fake humans, they've always been that. But there was this illusion that each one of them were different from one another because, like, you know, Demi Moore looks totally different than Michelle Pfeiffer or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, it's just all the same shit. And you can tell, like, Twitter and Instagram and stuff makes that obvious, right?
They're the same.
They're exactly the same. And then there's a beautiful, like, you know, when you're driving along and you see somebody driving by themselves in the car with the mask on, right? Like, and you're just like, how the fuck? But no, it's actually perfect. Like, that is the truth of the reality. People are afraid of the truth about who they are. And all of this shit distracts them from having to think about that. So the mask is perfect. They love the mask, not because they're afraid of the virus, because it prevents having to do any sort of looking yourself in the eyes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
I can be asleep and judge myself as better than everyone because I wear a muzzle and I enslave myself.
Yeah. All right. I think let's wrap it and wind it up. There was not an afterwards last time or this time, but we'll bring it back next time.
Right. And all my afterwards have disappeared. Sorry, everyone, because my YouTube disappeared and I'm waiting for Emily to put all our shows in a Dropbox for me.
So I don't have a Dropbox big enough to put all the shows in at a time. I just have like the free Dropbox.
Well, we'll figure it out. And I just want to be clear because that sounded bitchy the way that I said it. And it's not your fault that I decided to delete all my videos and not save our shows. So I take responsibility, but I just want to acknowledge that my afterwards are down. I only have like 5 patrons anyway. But what I did want to say was in our larger conversation of the Weinstein brothers, that since the erection, Eric Weinstein has been very vocal in parroting the New York Times and the mainstream narrative in there is no evidence of erection fraud. And I get so frustrated when I hear that because it's like, no, you just haven't found any. But to say that it doesn't exist,
right,
is crazy. You know what I'm saying? You haven't seen it because you haven't looked for it, but then it came out that there was some erection interference earlier on with Andrew Yang.
Yes.
And then he went totally ballistic about the amount of erection fraud. And I literally like laughed out loud so hard.
Okay, so here I'll do one last mind bender to let's go make it afterwards for this one. Okay. Patreon.com/Dani Katz or patreon.com/Off Planet Media for the afterwards. Okay, bye.
Right.